Hello, friends. Oh my goodness, what a week it has been. So, to the point that I've posted a few things. I'm going to talk about the US election, but I'm going to context this. So, first off, I am not saying that I am pro-Trump, that I'm anti-Biden or anything like that. What I do want to talk about is in context of racism, and why I continue to say that we cannot reduce racism down to something as easy as saying this person is racist and this person is not. And I say that because a couple of people have messaged me and said, oh, like, when you're going to do your post about, Trump and Biden and that whole thing, right? And I was like, well, you're never going to see me do it. I really get that, you can post about Donald Trump and everyone go, yeah, and you get like loads of people going, yeah, he's shit, he's this, he's this. My thing is, the battle that we face goes beyond individuals to this point. And my concern is when we make things purely about you're racist and you're not, people shut down. And I think the US election is a really good example of what also can happen within an organisational context, right? So if you're a Republican or a Red or however you refer to yourself as, in this current climate, at best you'll get cancelled, right? If you tell people that's who you support, that's your political party, your political leanings, whatever else it is. At worst, you'll get attacked. So if you feel like you're outnumbered, what you will do is you will go quiet. And people will mistake your silence for agreement. So they're thinking, well, so-and-so isn't talking about Trump and who they're going to vote, so they must be voting for Biden. They must be voting for, they must be doing X, Y, and Z. And then lo and behold, what we see is Trump did have a lot of support. And a lot of people, like, I didn't see that coming. So when you make things so binary, and this is my point, it's this or it's this, and there's no space for a conversation, there's no space for discussion, because we're reducing people to purely about whether they take X decision or Y decision, we actually make things worse. So that's my first point. My second point is, I wish we could solve racism just by having one individual in power versus another individual. But it is not that simple. I also wish we could equate having a black woman in power as an example of not only progress, let's take it one step further, but as an example we're making a start to dismantling racism. And I tell you why I think this is not the case. The two don't compute. Do I think it's progressive, the fact that Kamala Harris is in power, so to speak? You know what I mean? She's in political office. Absolutely. Do I think it's an important point for this whole piece about representation? But you can have a black person in power who does nothing for black people. I'm not saying she does or she doesn't. Who knows? We'll see, right? You can have a white person who is not racist, who also does nothing for black people. So if we focus on behaviours and individual prejudice, do you know what I mean? Then we think, by definition of having one person over another, we're magically going to solve this. And we forget that racism is a system. And we also forget, because I think about this from my point of view, there's a lot of black people who are happy and comfortable, is probably the better word than happy, comfortable to champion the rights of every other marginalised group other than themselves. I was ready to champion. I have championed for 17 years every other group other than my black community. So you could have made me the CEO of an organisation, a large organisation with 2,000, 5,000 people. Just because I'm black does not mean I am going to push for progressive change for black people. This is why this issue of race is so complicated. Because in the same way that non-black people are uncomfortable to prioritise black people, some black people are also uncomfortable to prioritise black people. So one does not equate to the other. Having a black person in power, and we saw that with President Obama. And the point that I'm making with this, I'm using these as an examples. I'm not getting into the politics of it, but I'm just saying, just because you have black people doing X doesn't mean it's a win for the whole racial injustice, the whole structural racism movement. It's a win, but it's in context. So I guess, worried is the right term. Because I see this, and it's a little bit like we're touching on that whole conversation about cancel culture, aren't we, a little bit? But I wish it was that simple, is what I want to say. I wish I could sit here and say that, you know, some of my white friends who would vote for Biden if we had that in the UK, right? So the equivalent, right? If you're going to go and do that, I could sit here and think they are the most anti-racist individuals just by definition of how they voted. That's not the case. And I wish I could sit here and also say that any people that I know, any of my friends, any of my network who would vote Trump are the most racist individuals you could ever imagine. That is also not the case within context. So if we make this, and remember, my focus is about dismantling structural racism. It is about pushing for change, which means putting in equitable practices, pushing people past their comfort zone to get into discomfort, to start to question the way they thought the world was put together. Because we recognise that you can have a completely different experience and occupy the same space purely because of the colour of your skin. So this is why I completely get it's a moment for lots of different reasons. But if we keep making this about Donald Trump is racist and Biden isn't, and that's the extent of the conversation, so we're taking up oxygen and carbon dioxide to talk about that, but we're not talking about what are the policies, right? What are the actions that are going to be taken on the back of this? That's what I would like to see more of. Do you know what I mean? We've seen more people step into their civic power, as I like to call it, and recognise. Stacey Abrams showed that completely. The power of the little people, the power of people like us who don't have big positions of power and influence, but when we come together we can affect change. So if we can affect change to the extent that we vote out one person over another, we can also affect change when we hold politicians to account for the policies that they campaign to say they were going to do and make sure they deliver. In the same way as employees, we can hold our leadership teams to account to say, well, if you said 3 months ago that we were going to commit to being an anti-racist organisation, what have we done? That is how we step into our civic power in every sense within society, you know? And that's why I think we will do more damage if we continue to perpetuate this thing that says it's purely about behaviour. You know, it isn't, it is more than that. And I will keep on talking and keep reminding people. It's why you won't see me go for or talk about or post about in that way, like this person's shit and that person isn't. From that point of view, it's like, can we get into the depths of this? Can we talk about the deeper, meaningful stuff around this? How are we going to affect change? Because one individual cannot affect change. But I just want people to be really clear. The this is from my perspective, that one individual's actions is not a win for racism when you understand how complex racism is, when you recognise it's a system. And when you also recognise that just by having a black person in does not mean we are on our way to dismantling racism, unless they prioritise black people, unless they put in policies to address, look at the contract with Black America, unless, and if we're going to start talking about that, that's the conversations we should be talking about. Deconstructing some of the things in that to say, okay, how far or not does that come to addressing the root cause of an issue? Not what's palatable, not what's popular, not what's easier, right? So this is why I wanted to record this, you know, and this is why I'm not going to clip it, because I didn't want anything I said taken out of context. I know some people could be like, oh my God, Shereen, how can you say? And I'm like, well, listen, you know, I am laser focused on what I believe needs to change and how it needs to change. And I don't believe labeling people racist or not racist actually solves anything. It's not to devolve them from the responsibility, because listen, there's lots of racist people out there, we just don't know it. But even if we did know it and everyone walked around with a plaster on their face that says I'm racist, I'm not racist, like what difference does it make in the grand scheme of things with the things that need to be changed, you know? So probably not the video. This is so not the video people wanted me to record, right? But this is what I'm going to say. If you're going to ask me, right, and you're going to keep asking me to go, oh, what are you going to say? Well, this is what I've got to say. That's it. So that is the tea, my friends. Thank you. And as always, listen, I'll wait for your feedback. I know some of you are going to be like, oh, Jesus, Shereen. But you know what? I had to say what I had to say. So I'll see you again soon.